He'd sworn never to love again, until a crying mail-order bride stepped off the train. Noah Hayes stood at the edge of the dusty platform, his hands resting on the worn leather straps of his chaps. The train, a long, rusted behemoth, screeched to a halt in front of him, kicking up a cloud of red dust that settled around his boots. The sun beat down from a cloudless sky, casting long shadows on the cracked ground. It was the kind of heat that made everything feel like it was burning from the inside out, and yet Noah didn't mind. He had learned to live with the land, with its scorching summers and freezing nights. The message had come 2 weeks ago. A letter from his late mother's lawyer reminding him of a promise he had made years ago. A promise that now seemed like a cruel joke. A mail-order bride. The woman he had been told would be coming was supposed to be a solution to his loneliness, but no one knew better than to believe in fairy tales. He had sworn never to love again after what happened all those years ago. The sound of the train's whistle broke his thoughts as it finally came to a stop. He adjusted the brim of his hat, keeping his face in shadow, and scanned the crowd. It wasn't the first time he had seen a mail-order bride, but it was the first time he had to meet one, personally. He wasn't sure what to expect. From what he had heard, they were mostly women, desperate for a fresh start, looking for a man who could provide a roof over their heads and food on the table. The train doors opened and passengers began to disembark. One by one they stepped off, walking down the platform toward the waiting buses. Noah's eyes followed them, looking for a woman who might be his bride, though the word felt like an odd one to him now. His gaze stopped on a young woman at the far end of the platform. She was standing off to the side, clutching a small suitcase in her hands, her eyes looking down at the ground. Her dark hair was tucked under a wide-brimmed hat, and her dress, though plain, was clean and neat. She had the look of someone who had seen hardship, and she was crying. Her shoulders shook with quiet sobs, and she wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Noah's heart twisted in his chest, but he immediately pushed the feeling down. He had no room for feelings anymore. Not after everything that had happened. He walked toward her, each step heavy with the weight of his decision. She didn't see him approaching until he was right in front of her. "You Lila Foster?" he asked, his voice low but firm. The woman looked up at him, startled. Her wide brown eyes were filled with surprise and fear. She wiped her tears away quickly and nodded, her lips trembling slightly. Yes, I am." Noah's heart softened just a bit at the sight of her fear. He could see she was trying to hold herself together, but it was clear that the journey had taken its toll on her. She had probably spent days traveling across the galaxy, alone, and now she was standing in front of a man she didn't know, in a strange land that must have felt even more foreign than Earth. Noah cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the situation. "I'm Noah Hayes. I guess I'm your husband." The word felt strange on his tongue. He had never considered himself the marrying type, let alone someone who would be tied to a woman he didn't even know. But he had made a promise to his mother before she passed. A promise that, as much as he hated it, he couldn't ignore. Lila nodded again, though she still didn't say anything. Instead, she took a small step back, as if unsure of what to do next. Noah frowned, feeling the awkwardness in the air. This wasn't how he had imagined it. He wasn't sure what he had imagined, but it certainly wasn't this. A mail-order bride wasn't supposed to cry. She wasn't supposed to look lost and scared. "Are you okay?" Noah asked, his voice gentler than he meant it to be. Lila looked up at him, her eyes red from crying. "I don't know if I'm okay," she whispered, almost to herself. "I've lost everything. I don't even know why I came here." Noah's gut tightened at her words, but he quickly masked his reaction. He didn't want to get involved. He couldn't afford to care. He had sworn that off long ago. But there was something about her, something in the way she spoke, that pulled at him. "Well," Noah said, trying to focus on the task at hand, "we should get you settled in. I've got a place about 10 miles out of town. You can rest there for now." Lila nodded, but didn't speak again. She simply followed him as he led her to the waiting transport that would take them to his ranch. The drive was silent, the only sounds the hum of the engine and the distant cries of alien wildlife. Noah glanced at Lila occasionally, but she kept her gaze fixed out the window, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. He had no idea what to say to her. How could he? He had no experience with this sort of thing. He had been alone for so long that the idea of sharing his space with another person seemed strange, almost unnatural. When they reached the ranch, Noah showed her to the small guest cabin where she would stay. It was modest, but it was warm and safe. He didn't want to offer her anything more. She wasn't his to care for, after all. But as Lila stepped into the cabin, her eyes widened, and she seemed to relax for the first time since they met. "This'll be fine," she said softly, as though trying to convince herself. Noah nodded, his throat tight. "There's food in the pantry. I'll be around if you need anything. Just take it easy for now." Lila smiled faintly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Thank you, Noah." He gave a short nod before turning and walking out of the cabin, leaving her alone. As he stepped back outside, he took a deep breath, trying to shake the unease that had settled in his chest. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he knew one thing for certain. He had just made a decision that would change his life forever. And for the first time in years, he wasn't sure if it was for the better. The first few days at Noah's ranch were awkward, to say the least. Lila spent most of her time in the small guest cabin, where she stayed quietly, trying to adjust to the strange new world she found herself in. Noah respected her space, only checking in every once in a while to make sure she had everything she needed. But even from a distance, he could see how isolated she was, just like him. The ranch was quiet, save for the sounds of the wind rustling through the tall grasses and the occasional cry of distant wildlife. Noah had grown used to the silence, but Lila, well, she was a city girl, far removed from the lonely expanse of the frontier. He could tell she wasn't adjusting well. She missed Earth. She missed everything she had lost. Noah had his own demons to deal with. The woman he had once loved, Elizabeth, had died years ago, leaving him broken. He had promised never to love again. The pain of that loss was too much. The memory of her haunted him every day, even though he had tried to bury it under years of solitude and work. But now, with Lila in his life, he found that promise being tested. It wasn't long before Noah's concern for Lila began to grow. He found her sitting outside the cabin one evening, her arms wrapped around her knees, staring at the horizon. Her face was pale and her eyes looked distant. She hadn't been sleeping well, and Noah had caught her wiping away tears more than once. He knew she was struggling with the loneliness just as he had. He couldn't ignore it, but he didn't know how to help her either. "Everything all right?" he asked, walking up slowly so as not to startle her. Leela looked up at him, her eyes red from crying. She tried to force a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm fine," she said quietly, though the words sounded hollow. Noah hesitated before sitting down beside her on the wooden bench. He wasn't great with words, but he could sense her pain, even if she didn't want to admit it. "You know, you don't have to pretend with me," he said, his voice low. "You can talk about it if you want." For a moment, Lila said nothing, her gaze focused on the distant hills. But then, her shoulders sagged and she let out a long breath. "I don't know how to be here, Noah," she confessed, her voice trembling. "This place. It's so different from everything I've known. The people on Earth, they never told me it would feel like this. It's like I'm in a different world, and I don't belong here." Noah felt a pang of sympathy for her. He had known isolation in his own way, but he could only imagine how much harder it must be for someone like Lila, who had left everything behind in search of something better. He didn't know what to say to make her feel better. There were no easy answers to her pain. "You'll get used to it," he said, though he wasn't sure he even believed the words himself. "It'll get easier, in time." Lila didn't respond immediately. She just sat there, staring ahead. Noah watched the way the wind played with her hair, and for a brief moment, he felt the stirrings of something he couldn't name. He wanted to help her, but he didn't know how. After a while, Lila stood up slowly. "I should go inside. Thank you for checking on me," she said, her voice still quiet. Noah nodded. "You're welcome." He watched as she walked back to the cabin, her steps slow and heavy. It made his chest tighten, but he forced the feeling down. He wasn't supposed to care. He had sworn to never get involved. His heart was a fortress, and it had to stay that way. The days blended together as Noah and Lila continued their uneasy coexistence. Noah focused on his work, tending to the ranch, feeding the animals, and maintaining the land that had been in his family for generations. But in the quiet moments, when the sun sank behind the horizon and the stars began to fill the sky, Noah found his thoughts drifting back to Lila. She was still struggling. He could see it in the way she moved, the way she held herself, the way she hardly spoke. It seemed like she was fading away before his eyes, and for some reason that bothered him more than he could explain. One afternoon, as Noah was out in the fields checking on the fences, he saw her again. She was standing near the barn, her back turned to him. She was watching something, probably the sky, but her posture was rigid, and she looked small, fragile, like she didn't belong here. Noah's instinct was to ignore it, to walk away and pretend he hadn't seen her. But something pulled him toward her. He didn't want to admit it, but he was worried. "Lila," he called out, his voice firm but kind. She turned around quickly, as if startled by his presence. Her face was flushed, and her eyes were wide with something fear, pain. It was hard to tell. "Are you all right?" he asked again, stepping closer. "You've been out here a while. Is everything okay?" Lila didn't speak right away. She just stared at him, her lips pressed tightly together. Finally she spoke, her voice small. "I don't know how to do this, Noah. I don't know how to be here with you." With all of this. The words hit Noah like a punch to the gut. He didn't know what to say. He had tried to be distant, to keep his emotions in check, but it was becoming harder to ignore her pain. He didn't want to admit it, but he felt responsible. She was here because of him, because of the promise he had made. "I didn't ask for this," Lila continued, her voice shaking. "I didn't ask for any of it, but now I'm here, and I don't know how to go on like this." Noah took a step forward, his heart pounding in his chest. He reached out, unsure of what to do, but feeling like he needed to do something. "Lila, you don't have to carry this alone. You're not alone here. He stopped himself, suddenly aware of how close they had become. But Lila didn't pull away. Instead, she stepped closer, her eyes searching his face as if looking for something. An answer, maybe, or a reassurance that everything would be okay. The world seemed to fade around them. The wind, the animals, the land, all of it disappeared as they stood there. Just the two of them. Noah's heart beat louder in his chest, and he realized, with a jolt, that he cared. He cared more than he had ever allowed himself to. The days after their conversation were quiet, but the tension between Noah and Lila was palpable. She seemed to retreat more into herself, and Noah couldn't help but notice the way her eyes had lost some of their spark. The long, lonely stretches of the frontier hadn't been kind to her. Still, there was something about her that pulled at him, a fragility mixed with strength, a kindness hidden beneath the layers of sadness. Noah had never been good at talking about feelings. He didn't even know how to start a conversation with her without making things worse. But he couldn't keep pretending like he didn't care. The quiet tug in his chest, the constant worry about her well-being, it wasn't something he could ignore anymore. One evening, after finishing his work on the ranch, Noah went to the small cabin where Lila stayed. He knocked gently on the door, his heart beating faster than it should. "Lila?" he called out. "You in there?" A moment passed before the door opened, revealing Lila, her eyes a little puffy but clear. She'd been crying again, he noticed, but she didn't seem embarrassed. There was no shame in her face, just an empty weariness. "I wanted to check in on you," Noah said, his voice a little rough. "You doing all right?" Lila gave a small nod, though it didn't seem entirely convincing. "I'm okay," she replied softly. "Just thinking." Noah shifted on his feet, unsure of what to say. The silence between them seemed too thick to cut through. He didn't want to pressure her, but he couldn't stand to watch her isolate herself any longer. "I know this is all a lot," he started slowly. "It's not what either of us expected." Lila's gaze dropped to the floor for a moment, and when she looked up, her eyes were filled with something Noah hadn't seen in her before. Frustration. "I didn't expect this life," she admitted, "but I don't know what to do with it. Every time I try, I end up feeling like I'm failing." Noah felt a pang of guilt shoot through him. He had never meant for her to feel this way. He hadn't exactly welcomed her with open arms. He had kept his distance, believing that was what was best for both of them. But he now realized that had only made her feel more alone. "You're not failing, Lila," Noah said, taking a step closer. "You're not failing at anything. You're just adjusting." Lila shook her head slowly. "I don't know how to adjust to a life like this, Noah. I don't know how to be a mail-order bride. I'm not made for it." Noah sighed, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "You didn't ask for this, and neither did I. But we're both here now, and that means we've got to find a way to make it work." There was a long silence as Lila stared at him, as if trying to read him. Then, quietly, she said, "I'm scared, Noah." The words hit him harder than he expected. He wanted to reach out to comfort her, but he didn't know how. He had never been good at offering comfort. But seeing her like this made him realize that he had to try. He wasn't the only one who had been hurt by the past. Lila had her own scars, her own pain that she hadn't been able to shed yet. "I know you're scared," Noah said, his voice soft. "I'm scared too. I've been running from my own demons for years. But I can't run anymore. Not with you here." Lila looked at him, her expression softening just a little. "I don't want to be a burden to you." No one's a burden, Noah replied firmly. Not you, not me. We're both just trying to figure this out. For a moment, the air between them seemed less heavy. Lila took a deep breath and nodded, though she still didn't look entirely at ease. I'll try, she whispered. Noah gave her a small smile. That's all anyone can do. The next few days were different. Lila seemed to open up more, though she was still cautious, still unsure of her place on the ranch. But she began to help with the smaller tasks, tending to the animals, making simple repairs on the cabin. Noah could see the determination in her eyes, the quiet strength she had when she wasn't lost in her own thoughts. It reminded him of the woman she must have been back on Earth, before everything fell apart. One afternoon, Noah and Lila set out to gather firewood. The weather was mild, with the sun dipping behind the distant hills, casting long shadows across the land. The ranch was peaceful, almost serene. It was hard to imagine that anything bad could happen here, but Noah knew better. The frontier was always unpredictable. As they worked, Lila spoke more than she had in days. She told Noah about her life on Earth, about the small town where she had grown up, about the family she had lost in the war that ravaged the planet. She spoke of her dreams of escaping, of finding a new life, even if she hadn't known what that would look like. Noah listened quietly, the weight of her words sinking into him. When they finished gathering firewood, Lila turned to Noah. Thank you, she said, her voice soft but genuine. I don't know why, but this feels right. Being here with you. Noah felt a warmth in his chest at her words. He hadn't expected to hear that. He hadn't expected to feel anything at all. But somehow Lila was breaking through the walls he had so carefully built around his heart. You're welcome, he said gruffly, his voice a little rougher than he intended. We'll get through this. Together. And for the first time in a long while, Noah believed it. As the days passed, Noah and Lila continued to find their rhythm. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of tension, moments when the silence grew too loud, and moments when Lila retreated into herself. But there was progress, and that was more than Noah had expected. He didn't know what would come of their arrangement, but he knew he wasn't as alone as he had been before. One evening, as the stars began to fill the sky, Noah stood outside and looked out across the ranch. It had been years since he had truly felt peace, but in that moment, with the soft wind brushing against his face and the faint sound of Lila humming inside the cabin, he felt something stir within him. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, this second chance wasn't a curse. Maybe it was a blessing. The sun had begun to set on the ranch, casting long shadows over the wide open land. The orange and purple hues stretched across the sky like a painter's canvas, and the distant hills seemed to glow softly in the evening light. It was moments like these that made Noah appreciate the quiet life he had built here on Valora. But tonight, something was different. There was a restlessness in the air, a tension that neither he nor Lila could ignore. Noah was outside finishing up the last of the chores for the day. He had always been a man of routine, work hard, keep to himself, and try not to think about the past. But lately, things had been changing. Lila had become a part of his life in ways he hadn't expected. She was no longer just a mail-order bride he had to look after. She was someone he genuinely cared about. And it scared him. He had spent years building walls around his heart, afraid to let anyone in. But with every day that passed, those walls seemed to crumble just a little more. Lila's laughter, her kindness, her quiet determination, it all slowly crept into his life, filling the spaces he had once kept empty. Tonight, though, Noah couldn't deny the weight in his chest. The ranch had become a place of peace for him, but it was also a place of confrontation. The feelings he had long buried were rising to the surface, and he wasn't sure what to do with them. He heard the sound of footsteps behind him and turned to see Lila walking toward him, her figure silhouetted by the fading sunlight. She was carrying a basket, likely filled with fresh herbs and vegetables from the garden. The sight of her, so strong yet so gentle, struck him in a way that left him speechless. "Mind if I join you?" she asked, her voice soft, but there was an edge of uncertainty in it. Noah nodded a little too quickly. "Of course not. You're always welcome." Lila smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. There was something on her mind, something she wasn't saying. Noah could feel it, just like he could feel the change in the air around them. They had been growing closer, but there was still so much they didn't know about each other, so much that was unsaid. She set the basket down next to him and sat on the worn wooden bench that had always been his spot. For a moment they simply sat in silence, watching the sun dip lower in the sky. "Do you ever think about going back?" Lila asked suddenly, her voice almost a whisper. The question caught Noah off guard. He hadn't expected it, and it took him a moment to process the meaning behind it. Going back? He repeated, though he wasn't sure what she meant. Did she mean back to Earth? Back to the life they both left behind? She nodded, her gaze still fixed on the horizon. Back to Earth. Back to everything we knew before. I sometimes think about what my life could have been like if I hadn't left. If I had stayed home with my family. Noah turned his head to look at her. There was pain in her voice, but there was also a sense of longing. He knew the feeling well. He had often wondered what his life would have been like if he had made different choices, if things had turned out differently.
I think about it sometimes, Noah said quietly.
What would have happened if I had stayed with Elizabeth, if I had done things differently? But what good would it do now? He paused, trying to find the right words. We can't change the past, Lila. All we can do is live with what we have now. Lila didn't respond immediately. She just sat there, her hands folded in her lap, her fingers nervously twining together. Noah could see the struggle in her eyes. She was torn between what she had lost and what she had found here with him. And Noah realized that he, too, was caught between the past and the future. What do you want, Lila? He asked suddenly, his voice rougher than he intended. What do you want from all of this? Lila looked at him then, her eyes wide and searching. For a moment she didn't speak, but the look on her face told Noah everything he needed to know. She was scared. Scared of the unknown, scared of the future, and maybe even scared of him. I don't know, she said softly. I don't know what I want anymore. I came here because I thought it would be better, but I don't feel better. I feel lost. Noah's heart clenched. He could see the weight of her words, feel the pain that came with them. She had trusted him to give her a new life, and now she was realizing that the world she had imagined wasn't what she had hoped for. The ranch, the quiet life, they weren't enough to fill the emptiness she carried inside her. I'm not good at this, Noah admitted, his voice quiet but firm. I don't know how to make it better. I don't know how to fix what's broken. But I can promise you this, I'll try. I'll try to help you even if I don't have all the answers. Lila looked at him, her eyes filled with something softer now. Maybe trust, maybe relief. She didn't speak, but she didn't need to. The silence between them wasn't uncomfortable anymore. It was a silence of understanding, of two people who had been through their own storms and who, in some small way, could offer each other peace. Noah, Lila said, her voice quieter now but stronger. I don't expect you to have all the answers. I just need someone who will be there. Who will be here with me? I can't do this alone. Noah reached over, gently placing his hand on hers. It was a simple gesture, but to Lila, it meant everything. She had been waiting for someone to show her that she wasn't alone, that she wasn't just a burden. I'm here, Noah said firmly, his thumb brushing over her hand, and I'll stay. Lila finally smiled, a small but genuine smile that made something inside Noah stir. She wasn't just a mail order bride anymore. She was someone he had come to care for, someone who had become a part of his life, a part of his heart. For the first time in years, Noah realized that he had found something worth fighting for. Not just the ranch, not just the land, but the chance to be with someone who made him feel like he wasn't broken anymore. I would be so homeless, someone who made him feel whole. And as they sat there together, the stars beginning to twinkle in the darkening sky, Noah knew that the past, with all its pain and regret, no longer had control over him. He was ready for the future, ready for whatever it held, because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't alone.